New Orleans Saints a fit for the GOAT. Bill Belichick, head coach potential for the New Orleans Saints. Ross Jackson with a beard. Very nice, Ross. Okay, so we're going to listen to this video, react along the way, talk about Bill Belichick. Now, it's an interesting time to talk about the Saints head coach because right now, the front runner is probably in the building. I think if Darren Rizzi wins, or if Darren Rizzi loses 2 or less games down the stretch, I think he'll be the front runner to be the head coach. Bill Belichick is an interesting choice, and we'll talk about why I don't think that would work. I do like Vrabel. So Vrabel is on here on the top right, as you can see. I mentioned Vrabel, probably a month ago now, maybe even more. I think Vrabel ticks all the boxes, but the current setup with the team, how Rizzi has been so far, my trust in Kubiak, I am a little hesitant to just say, you know what, throw all that away, give the keys to Vrabel, let it rip. I'd be okay with it, and we'll talk about that later on. But first, we want to talk about Bill Belichick. And could the GOAT be coming to New Orleans?
The New Orleans Saints makes more sense than I thought it did, but there is one thing or person that could get in the way of the Saints landing one of the greatest coaches of all time. We got all of that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
Before we get to the lanyap, what he's talking about with that is Mickey Loomis, because Bill Belichick wants GM power. He wants control of the roster. He wants control of everything. That's why he didn't get hired by the Falcons. That's why he's not going to get hired by the Saints. Mickey Loomis is not going to hand over all of that, even to Bill Belichick. And I'll tell you this. I'm not sure he should, because Bill Belichick is 72 years old. Okay? He'll be 73 next season. The Saints are not in a win-now situation. So let's say Belichick builds this. Let's say Belichick builds that. And he hangs around for, 2 years? 3 years? Sweet. Then we're in the exact same situation where we're trying to find a new coach with a new culture. And I just don't think the timelines work. And honestly, I know it's easy to say this, but you take Brady out of the equation, I don't know if Belichick is exactly the roster builder you want. When you go back and look at the drafts, they were horrible. When you go look at a lot of it, it was not good. And Brady made it good. It's just, that's what happens when you have Tom Brady under center, right? So, and then you look at, I'm really hesitant about this idea of okay, well, the Saints need something new, and that something new being a very, very short-term deal. What I will say positively about Bill, he absolutely will come in and completely change the operational infrastructure of the Saints. If he was 62, okay, let's see what can happen. Just to instill a different kind of, culture might be the wrong word for it, but just instill a different attention to detail. What really is the point of instilling that if in a couple of years the roster's turning over and you're finding a new coach? So I just don't think it all lines up for Belichick.
Your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native. Does Bill Belichick to the New Orleans Saints even make sense from an organizational standpoint?
Yeah, I think in New Orleans, I could see him being a guy that would love to come in. Look, first of all, I can tell you from personal experience, Bill's a big jambalaya guy. Living down in New Orleans, I think would be an inclusion. So, yeah, I think that could be intriguing for him. But no, all kidding aside, look, Bill Belichick is looking for an organization that it definitely has its share of history behind it, definitely has its share of being able to handle the spotlight. And we've been seeing the New Orleans Saints handle the spotlight on numerous occasions. An ownership that is dedicated to spending the money that it takes to be able to win and be able to bring in people that may not be the most popular selections among the fan base, but people that he knows he can succeed with. That may mean some additional head coach. That may mean some different coaches. That may mean some different personnel than this team is seeing. It may mean.
I mean, he would definitely overhaul the entire thing. That is for sure. If you're going Belichick, it's a clean slate. Belichick is going to bring in his coaches, his scheme, his personnel, his staff. He's going to start building his roster. He's going to play the game his way. There is nothing that would roll over to the Belichick era if you went that way. And like I said, why risk that? Why make that kind of a wholesale change for such a short-term thing. I mean, what's the most you could see Belichick coaching? 5 years? He's going to be 77, 78. You got a 78-year-old head coach? I don't know. I mean, that just, not saying he can't, not saying you can't coach at 78, but I don't know about all that.
Unfortunately, letting go of some high-priced talent in favor of some, I guess the terminology used up here, Ross, was bargain basement for quite a while. But Bill Belichick made a pretty good living in New England by being able to identify that talent. But if New Orleans is willing to bring along that type of persona in Bill Belichick, and they allow him the opportunity to be able to shop for the groceries and to cook the meal, so to speak, as Bill Parcells would say, yeah, I can see him definitely being intrigued by New Orleans because you have all the high-octane elements of a proper franchise that could handle someone like Bill, and you've got a great amount of talent on both sides of the ball that I know he would love to be able to cultivate.
Yeah, I guess that was my next question is, obviously he's any head coach that comes in here to New Orleans that's going to be new is going to look to potentially change around talent, things like that. How do you feel the talent that the Saints have right now, knowing that they don't really have the ability to tear it all down in one offseason? How do you feel about the talent that New Orleans does have and how Bill Belichick would kind of fit and meld and kind of be excited by what the Saints do have?
Well, offensively, I can tell you Bill Belichick would be 100% intrigued by New Orleans' offense and what he could do, or a staff of his choosing could do with that offense. And by Bill Belichick, I mean potentially maybe even bringing in Josh McDaniels as an offensive coordinator.
That's something else I've never liked with Belichick, is that he keeps, and this is what I heard. I had heard that he kind of keeps the same coordinators because he wants the same kind of yes men around him. He wants the people who are going to fall in line and be the Belichick disciples, which is why it's a revolving door of Josh McDaniel or even McDaniels would leave, then come back, then leave, then come back. Same thing on every side of the ball. He wants his guys there, whether it's Matt Patricia. Matt Patricia was there, left, there, different roles. So Belichick had his son on the staff for a while until he left New England. Now his son's in Washington, the collegiate football team, not the Commanders. So I don't know. I think Belichick just got a little too he got a little too internal, where everything was so the same. Something just rubbed me wrong about his son being on the staff and the same three coordinators just shuffling around nonstop.
Look, say what you will about Josh as a head coach, but he is very talented when it comes to being able to scheme up offenses. So if that's the case, you're looking at guys like Derek Carr. You're looking at, I know they're on IR right now, but Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. These are guys that could thrive in that type of an environment. And Bill Belichick loves to be able to take talented players, make them play together on the field, and really show what they're capable of when they're in the right hands. So from an offensive standpoint, it would be, I think, a great thrill for Bill Belichick to work with an offense that talented. On the defensive side of the ball, New Orleans usually loves to run their base 4-3-D. I'm not going to lie to you. That can change under Bill Belichick. He loves his 3-4. He loves those lumbering linebackers that can be able to put pressure and really anchor the middle part of that defense and have guys up front that are capable of taking up the double team. There is talent on that New Orleans defense right now. Cameron Jordan, guys like that I
sucks. Going to retire.
He would love to be able to work with. Bill's real penchant, I think, would be to rework the secondary a little bit, put guys in there that are capable of taking away your first two top options of an offense, of an opposing offense, and having maybe their lesser guys beat them. This is something that Bill Belichick would absolutely like to employ with New Orleans. So, yeah, I think from a logistical standpoint and from a talent standpoint, there's work he'd love to do to that offense. But that core there, I think, would be intriguing enough for him to at least take a good look at New Orleans.
I have no idea what the core is. No clue what the core would be. He would, again, it would completely change the roster. If you told me, all right, well, you can go with Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels. None of that excites me. None of that. And the Belichick thing is you are holding on to any team that gets Belichick, I think you're holding on to, can he create the quote-unquote Patriot way wherever he lands? But you have the biggest outlier or the biggest variable being Tom Brady. We don't even know if the Patriot way exists without Tom Brady. Before Tom Brady, after Tom Brady, the Patriots are not the Patriot way. That culture, the operational, all that stuff didn't do nothing. And what did Tom Brady do? He walked on down to Tampa Bay and won a Super Bowl. So I do think you have to have some kind of skepticism about just how much of a plug-in, like a plug-and-play, immediate success, roster builder, culture definer, all that stuff is, that Belichick is. And I think when you have a variable like that, and again, you have a 73-year-old head coach, and you're being promised basically a Matt Patricia, Josh McDaniel coaching staff with Steve Belichick, I can 100% guarantee you, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Belichick got Steve Belichick to be the DC, because Washington's defense has been kind of sweet. So wouldn't be surprised at all if it was Bill Belichick, Josh McDaniels, the OC, and Steve Belichick as the DC with a completely reworked roster. And to me, I would pass.
It's interesting. It's we've been doing this series for this is our fifth of six episodes, and outside of the original episode about Darren Rizzi, who I think right now should be considered the favorite to just hold on to the job, this is really kind of the first time that we're hearing somebody say, yeah, that's a coach that would love to work with players like that. Sure, they'll tinker and adjust, which you should expect, but it's really the first time we've heard like somebody say, yeah, that would be something that would fit with this head coach. So I think Saints fans are going to love to hear a little bit of that.
I mean, maybe I was drifting off into a different dimension, but to me, it didn't sound like he said that he would like to work with any players. Like, he named Cam Jordan on the defense, who's not going to be there, and said that Belichick would have to rework the secondary. The defensive line is a disaster. Carl Granderson is probably the only player that's even going to be there. I mean, Brian Brazil will be there, but he's a non-factor. So who the hell is he talking about? And then on offense, Chris Olave, we don't even know if he's going to play again. Like, who on the offense is Belichick? Like, hey, newsflash, guys. Belichick's going to rework the whole thing. Alvin Kamara is pretty much the only constant in this. And, it's kind of hard to believe, like, Belichick, McDaniel is going to come in and just be like, yeah, let's roll with Derek Carr. Yeah, let's do it. So I didn't hear any players that he would be excited about coming in and working with. So I missed that.
Here's the part where I'm really curious. Personally, Bill Belichick is somebody that carries this reputation of being sort of this hard-nosed kind of head coach, but that also kind of likes to be able to make personnel decisions and kind of have a general manager-like role and stuff like that. That's always a big conversation around him. Obviously, the Saints right now with Mickey Loomis as their general manager, he doesn't seem like he's ready to go anywhere. Do you feel like that's a situation Bill Belichick would be interested in, or is it really as important as people make it sound that he has kind of GM control as well?
Yeah, I think this is where I may lose some of the fans that I just gained by saying that Phil would love to work with the talent that's in that room, in that locker room. Being a GM, I don't think is something that is a deal breaker for Bill any longer. I think to have that title stripped from him in New England and still remain as a head coach wasn't an option on either side of the ball. So they were going to move on from Bill Belichick. I think they needed to move on and cleanly do that. And that's exactly what the Craps did when installing Jerod Mayo. With Bill, I don't think necessarily his new stop is going to include that general manager title. I think he'd like it to, but I don't think it's a deal breaker.
Yeah, let's not get bogged down in the title. Like the thing is, he wants roster control, whether that is officially the GM or not. He's not going to sit back and just do the X's and O's.
However, if you do have a strong presence in the GM room, and the Saints do with Mickey Loomis, that could create some friction that may mark against New Orleans as a potential home for Bill Belichick, because I can tell you there is still a lot of control he loves to have over the personnel on his roster. And if Bill feels like he doesn't have that, things can unravel very quickly, because Bill's style is very hard-nosed and very difficult sometimes for the modern NFL player to adapt to. They're not going to buy into it, and their coach is having difficulty with the front office. That is something that permeates into locker rooms. So I think that's something interesting to watch for when it comes to whoever the Saints are going to pursue. That's something that they need to factor in. It's certainly something they need to give credence to if they're thinking about Bill Belichick.
It's interesting.
The way I look at it, if you're building a culture or if you're building, like if you're trying to reset, right, you either need to have one hell of a foundation there, like the Chargers, who had a great foundation, and then they just needed Jim Harbaugh to come in, kind of tinker with, the operations and the culture and the identity and whatever. The Saints need a new identity / culture, but they also need a new roster. Like, that's the problem. So if you bring in somebody, you have to be willing to give them a couple years to get their roster in there, whether it's through the draft or through trades or free agency. But the Saints are going to have so much turnover just naturally. And I'm not even talking about next year. Like, we have a million times, we've mentioned 2026 as the natural expiration date for a majority of the contracts on the Saints. A lot of these players, their contract naturally expires in 2026. So whether it's next year or 2026, you are going to have a tremendous amount of turnover. Huge. I mean, in the next 2 years, I would say after, so this upcoming season, all right, 2025, and then the next season, 2026. After that, you're talking about Ryan Ramczyk, Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Chase Young, Tyrann Mathieu, Taysom Hill, Derek Carr. Who else am I missing? I mean, obviously, like Jamal Williams. Those players, at the minimum, are not going to be on the team. At the minimum. So think about that turnover. Like, think about just the roster turnover. You got to get somebody who's in there for the long haul, who's going to instill the culture, instill the identity, but also is willing for a couple of years to work with the roster, to build his roster, to build his people. That, again, doesn't sound like Belichick. That just doesn't sound like it lines up with what Belichick wants to do. His window or this team's window or the roster. It just, we need someone like Jim Harbaugh. We need somebody who is going to come in, long haul, totally top to bottom, change the team, and you're willing to give him a couple of years to build his brand of football or his style of whatever. That's what we need. Is Mike Vrabel Jim Harbaugh? Maybe not. But he is pretty close to a guy who can come in long term. He's got the culture. He's got the identity. He's been a winner. 10 games over 500 in Tennessee. Has had playoff success. Okay, I could listen to that. I could listen to Darren Rizzi. I could listen to Rizzi and Kubiak, and they're already building something. They're already kind of in this system. Okay, let's keep that going. If you believe in that system, if you believe in that scheme, keep that going. Keep it moving to where in a couple of years, they can build the roster they want. You can get out of this cap problem. You can move on to the next era, the next window. Those two options just make so much more sense to me than this Patriot way retread.
It sounds a lot like a scenario or a structure that's similar to what the Saints had for former head coach Sean Payton, would be more kind of attractive to Bill Belichick than where things were with Dennis Allen, where there was a very clear difference between head coach, general manager, all that. But then when Sean was around, he was the head coach, didn't have a general manager tag, but still made a lot of those personnel decisions. Does it sound like it would be like that kind of an arrangement that would be most appealing to Bill?
I would think so. If I'm looking at Bill, and I know from personal experience, and again, people that I've talked to that are close to him, he does want to return to the bench next year. He's having a blast this year. Anyone who has Instagram knows he's on social media for the first time, but he's happy.
I mean, we kind of need what Denver got with Sean. Like, we need a guy who's going to come in and say, okay, here's how we're going to do things. Like, I need these pieces. We're going to slowly chip away at this. And then within a couple of years, you see like this new roster kind of developing. You see this new thing developing. Peyton's first run in, first little bit in Denver was a total disaster. And then you started to see like, wait a second, Sean Payton's building something. Okay, it's not going to happen immediately. They're not going to win the Super Bowl this year. They might not even make the playoffs this year. But you can see the foundation for it is there. So you got to be willing to give a couple of years. You got to be willing to take a couple chances on draft picks. Like they took a big chance on Bo Nix. Seems to be paying off right now. But
having
That's
a
what we
great time
need.
doing the media tours, but he will be back on the bench, assuming a team is willing to give him that opportunity. And there seems to be teams right now that are looking at him in a new light. Yeah, I think that would be appealing for him to have more control over the front office personnel matters, not necessarily front office, but maybe just personnel matters that would allow him to put together the team he wants to put together on the field.
All right, y'all. One more big thank you to Mike.
Another thing the Saints need to work out with whoever the incoming head coach is this idea of how they do things with the salary cap. The Saints have a very unique financial strategy. Obviously, we all know that. Will a head coach be willing to do that? Like, will a head coach coming in be willing to say, okay, yeah, this is how we do things. This is our financial strategy. Or have the Saints done that? Have the Saints tried that? And they're willing to back away from that? Are the Saints willing to say, all right, we did this for 15 years. We had that core window of players we were trying to keep together. Maybe we should get away from that. Maybe we should get away from these weird contracts and pushing all the money into the end of the deals and kicking the can down the road. Maybe we get away from that, and maybe we get more towards the traditional contracts, and we try and play things a little more normal. Because I would think if you're a head coach and you're not used to that, you might not want just this revolving door of salary cap restrictions and kicking the can and all that. So that's another conversation that whoever comes in is going to have with Loomis in the front office, is how are we going to do this? Because if you do bring in someone like Mike Vrabel, and Vrabel has to rebuild this roster over the course of 2 to 4 years, he has to know, okay, how are we going to attack the contract? Are we planning on just doing this again? Are we planning on just redoing what we did with Michael Thomas and Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara and Cam Jordan and Marshawn Lattimore? And are we just going to redo that with new players, or are we trying to do something different? That also is going to be a huge factor in the head coach. So the Saints are an interesting landing spot for sure. I mean, I think they would be an attractive option because I think there is something unique about the Saints. Their history, they do have a good history. They do have some kind of cultural relevance. They're a city and a destination, and they've been in the limelight. They host Super Bowls. The fan base is good fan base. The Superdome just got a huge renovation. So all that is unique. All that is kind of attractive to a head coach. Then you get into the very unique salary cap structure and how we deal with contracts. Then you have to deal with Mickey Loomis. So there's a bunch of different layers before you even get to the roster, before you even get down to the actual nuts and bolts of the team. It's going to be, if it's not Rizzy, it's going to be a wild coaching search.
Debate over at Locked On Patriots. Coming up next, we're going to take...
All right, I just wanted to listen to the Belichick part, so we're going to stop the video there. Ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think about this, because this is polarizing. Belichick is always going to be polarizing because of his history. Would you want Bill Belichick? Would you want a Belichick, McDaniel, Belichick 2.0 with Steve? Would you want that? Or are you like me and you're thinking, 73 years old, retread coordinators, family ties. I don't know if I'm ready for all that. That doesn't sound great. Or do you think Bill Belichick could create the next Patriot way in New Orleans? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next.